Hi, I'm Ethan Wong, and today I'm here speaking with Jackson Neal.
What's up? My name is Jackson Neal. I'm the 2019 Houston Youth Poet Laureate and a National Youth Poet Laureate Ambassador to the Southwest. I'm a first wave scholar at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the co-author of the recently debuted chapbook, Dear Azula, I Have a Crush on Danny Phantom, published by Button Poetry.
Great. We'll get straight into the questions then. One universal question is just, how did you end up finding out about or getting to write poetry? And especially a caveat of this question I always bring up is, what made you a writer of it rather than just a reader of it?
Oh, okay. That's a really, I love that frame. You know, I mean, maybe it's corny, but I think that we're all poets insofar. Like, you don't really get a choice, right? Like, the act of poetry is alchemizing that imagination into this sort of like audible thought, which sort of initiates that sort of magic of the reality. And Audre Lorde writes this really beautifully in her essay, Thinking into Language into Action. Um, but for me and my particular origins, I like I I always make a joke. I like didn't have a lot of homies growing up, and so I just read, and like I think I feel really, really fortunate to be in the last cusp of the generation that did not have phones when they were children, right? So it was like if you didn't have anything to do in the summer, you just had to read a book, and that really illuminated me. When I was 15 years old, I participated in the small poetry slam hosted by my high school, and then later I had the opportunity to compete in the Space City Slam Series, which is a poetry slam hosted for high school students by Metaphor Houston, which is a youth slam team hosted by writers in the schools Houston. And so I ended up making this youth poetry slam team when I was 15 years old. And so like to answer your question, like what made me a writer of poetry rather than a reader was I think in the space of slam, in the space of communal performance, um, it was exciting and invigorating, especially as like a young queer person, to have a room listen to you and to really hear you bear yourself in the way that you can when you're 15 years old, um, and to endure that sort of proclamation of self and ride with you to the other side of it. That's really, really illuminating. And, so like I'm pursuing a dual BFA in English and dance, and so my art forms are really, really invested in the human form. The only things you have in your life are your body and the language inside of it. And when you're on that stage, you present the entirety of what you have to that audience. This is the only thing I have. It's the only thing that's real. Like, this is going to be gone. Like, this doesn't exist. It's all going to leave you and leave us eventually. But when this is gone, I'm gone. And I reveal that to an audience, and we sort of recognize our sort of mortality in that moment. And it's so invigorating. And it's a little less poetic. Like, I just like winning things. Like, I liked being in a slam and I was good at it and it was fun. So I competed on the Metaphor Houston slam poetry team for 3 years, and I was the back-to-back dual Space City Slam champion, and then later the Houston Youth Poet Laureate. And so like Houston has such a beautiful community of writers that's so engaged in not only writing together but sharing space and like communally gathering in the same location in order to uplift and support each other. And so I just always felt a deeply familial connection to all of the writers in the geography of the space in which I was writing, and so that just pushed me to do it more.
Yeah, I think there was definitely a lot in there that I relate to, and I totally agree with, especially like when you're talking about how it feels to express yourself in poetry. But I also kind of wanted to touch on that because I've heard this a bit now, which is that because I've never had a slam background. When I was writing poetry, it was just straight up like on the page kind of poetry. So I wanted to ask, so for you, has writing slam poetry and poetry that is more intended for like reading by other people, how do those kind of interact? Do you think they intersect more often than run parallel, or what do you kind of think goes on?
Yeah, this is a strange question. And it's a common one, right? And for one thing, I think we must recognize that before written language existed, there was the oral tradition. So the root, the beginning of poetry is in the voice, is in the performance. Like before we even had a means to communicate through writing, we had to communicate through our words. And before that, before we even invented words, before we had any verbal way to communicate, we communicated body to body by being two humans in front of each other and demonstrating physically what our needs are. So the root of poetry is actually long before language existed. And so for this reason, I think that sometimes I get frustrated with the belief that a performed poem and a poem on the page are exist in two different universes. They are like ancestors of each other. They come from the same place. And that, to be said, they do different things, right? There's something really exciting and electric about the immediacy of a performed poem, of an orally spoken poem, because it is completely ephemeral. It only exists in the moment it exists. The words that I say to you are gone the instant that you hear them. And this is being recorded, but when I'm in a slam, you have to be so present. And so, in some ways, I really feel kindred to and enlivened by the way that slam and performed poetry necessitates such an intense level of attention. We have so many devices trying to remove us out of a moment, trying to make us feel less. You know, I do a lot of research on social media and internet cultures and the way that companies hire engineers to distract us from our feeling human selves. And the that's gone the instant that it's created is that you must be there or it doesn't exist. It's not going to be repeated. We don't get to come back to it. And now I will say that when I'm writing on the page, and it all starts on the page, some of it stays there and some of it goes other places. But when I'm thinking about writing that might not be performed, it has the same impulse that I first developed in performing, which is that I think the intention of art is to allow us an opportunity to not be distracted, to pay attention to the feeling world of our corporeal selves, of our full human experience. This is a moment which makes you feel something, makes you know something about yourself, which you didn't know before, right? James Baldwin says the role of the artist and the role of the lover are one and the same. They teach you things you don't know about yourself. So I want to create an opportunity for my audience, whether it's on a stage or whether it's on paper, to deliver fully their selves into a world and to feel something inside of it. Because I think that we're in a time where it's very it's very pernicious the way that an artist might make you feel something less, might actually not equip you with more emotion or more intelligence or more focus, but less, because of the way that artists are being recruited into the industrial distraction machine. Sometimes what we make becomes content that someone can commercialize to consume and continues to allow people to actually not pay attention to what they're feeling. They might go to our art as escapism, or they might go to it so that they don't have to pay attention, or they don't have to think deeply or critically about the things that they say they want to pay attention to. We might just give them some sort of applause or affirmation that they're good people doing the right thing. And I don't ever want my work to do that. I want it to be a challenge, and I want it to awaken and aliven something, at least in myself, right? I make because whether it's on paper, whether it's in my voice, that I want to feel something more. I want to find the animal in me, the thing that people are trying to put to sleep. I want to see it. And if other people can see it too, then that is beautiful. And we become more human in that moment. Sometimes the page gives me things that performance can't, more quietness, more space. It's more intimate, you know? It's an audience of one. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about writing, about poetry, about literature is that it's one of the only performed arts where the artist performs just for you, right? Doesn't even speak, but it's like my mind is in your mind and we're right here. And I think that has so much potential, has so much power that other art forms don't have the opportunity to do as often, is that this voice is in your mind, it's in you, it's a performance for one. You have this whole theater, you have a whole world unraveling, you have life and death and like the Grecan origin story happening in your minds, and it's just for you. And so that's one element of the page that I admire that performance hasn't allowed me to do as often.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of truth in what you say about writing as a form of kind of ridding yourself of distractions, because I found that a lot of times when I ended up writing, it was because I mean I would have like some things going on, or I would have a lot of activities that I had to do. But when I wrote, it was always because I felt as if I wanted to dedicate this moment that I was starting to feel to the page, or I wanted to kind of seal something into whatever kind of poem I was writing, as to make sure that I kind of like captured that moment where I felt the specific way and I wasn't really thinking about like this or that, or I was thinking about some very specific things which I wanted to write down. I know I'm kind of fumbling over my words here as I say that, but I think my point is just being that I definitely agree with you that there is definitely an element to poetry which needs to be kind of that stillness almost. And for me, writing on the page has been my main choice, probably because performing has not always been my strong suit. So that's probably why I usually diverge to there.
Well, if you ever want to perform, Houston's a great space to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely thinking more of getting into it.
Mhm.
And also, I wanted to kind of follow up on that, which is that we've talked a little bit about like what you keep in mind when writing, but what is it that you mostly write about?
Oh man, it changes. It changes for sure. So I wrote a whole chapbook about cartoon characters, like a whole book of poems just about cartoon characters. And I was really serious when I did it. I think a lot of people kind of on the surface think it's a sort of like comedy project, and to a certain extent it is. Like I think it's okay to like look at these fun things and have fun in poetry. Um, but there was something really, really magical about this sort of like iconography of my early adolescence, especially like as a young closeted queer person. I think that, for instance, the character Danny Phantom, like he's really interesting to me from a sort of like queer lens because this young boy enters into some sort of like portal of technology and it splits him, it severs him into two people, himself and the ghost version of himself. And being these two people is not something to be ashamed of or something that debilitates him. Though he might have shame for it, though he might keep it a secret, it's actually the thing that empowers him. His ability to split out of his predestined self into his more powerful realized self is what enables him to do all the spectacular things that he does. And I didn't have the language for that when I was younger, but I think I intuited deeply that that was something powerful. For me as a young person, as a queer person, I also entered into a certain portal of technology. Like it was through Tumblr and the internet that I was even like able to gain language for what it meant to have desire for a man. I didn't like know that until the internet and all of its complexities and everything you can see inside of it enabled that as a possibility. And when it did, I was no longer this person that the American psyche had designed me to be. You know, I wasn't straight anymore, and I knew it. And so, even though I knew that there was sort of a breach or a partition of self, for a while I had to perform this version that was created for me, and it was scary to balance those two things. But I think doing so has given me a deep knowledge about the presupposed person that the American Project has designed me to be and the way in which I do not want to be that person. And recognizing that split of self, that duality, is really, really powerful and helpful to me. Like as an American citizen, there I am designed to be awful. I'm designed to be terrible to the world around me. And sometimes I am. But I want to recognize that that was the project, that was the consign, the blueprint was for me to not love my neighbor, was for me to live an unsatisfactory life. And I am trying to shuck that off. I write a lot about technology because I think it has many benefits and many downfalls, but it's sort of the closest thing, particularly the internet, one of the closest things that we have to sort of witnessing the human mind. It's this enormous labyrinth of information and ideas, and I think it's really, really incredible. Um, right now, I'm working on a project where I consider um, the possible intersections of the internet and BDSM culture. So, algorithmic worlds and technology are sort of, I won't say technology, but corporate commercialized social media, when industries own the internet, this is what happens, have designed an algorithm which looks at every glance, every click, every pickup of the phone. It knows everything you've ever done online since the time you looked. And it uses all this information to construct an identity which it thinks you are, your algorithmic self. So Google has a guess about who you might be. So Google might guess that I'm a white man in my mid 20s that lives in Madison, Wisconsin. But there's many, many more components to that, right? And based on that identity, looks at other people who share those traits and what content they consume, and then in Instagram, YouTube, Facebook will recommend either advertisements or content that is in the same region of consumption as that identity, and feed it to me as a way to keep me online. And what this does is it limits my possibilities for pleasures to those which have been decided on my behalf. The algorithm says that I must like these things because I am this way. And it's sometimes I do like them. Like sometimes things will pop up on my social media. I'm like, this is exactly the content that I wanted. But I wonder to what extent my pleasures are my own if they're all being suggested to me. Have I decided for myself the kind of life I want to live, the kind of things that make me happy? Or did someone else feed that to me? Am I participating in a plot that has me sketched as a character that I don't even know exists? And I think BDSM and sexuality in general, right? If we think about Audre Lorde's uses of the erotic, um, can negate this situation insofar as one must ask very precisely what is the thing that brings you pleasure, and you have to decide for yourself. Nobody can tell you. It needs to be your choice, and that decision about what you want, about even not even not just your pleasure, not exclusively pleasure, but even pain. What pain do you want, or what pain are you willing to endure? And all of this is your choice. You must decide for yourself. You can change your mind, but I'm going to give you what you want, and you must decide your course of pleasure. And in doing so, face the unknown, because I can't give you everything. But you might realize that there are things that were outside of your psyche, outside your sphere of knowledge, and they broaden your possibilities for pleasure. Um, so that's been a lot on my mind as I'm writing right now. And I think some people sort of like jeer at people writing about technology or people writing about popular culture or social media because it doesn't have the eternal of like the elements or the natural world. But it is our eternal, you know what I'm saying? Like right now it is, and maybe even more so, because when things exist online, they never go away, ever. A rock erodes, but an image that has been stored in the mind of a computer never dies.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I look forward to reading whatever it is you plot up with those kind of subjects. If you're ready, you can go ahead into the poem.
Word. I guess this is a good example. So this is the introductory poem to my chapbook, Dear Azula, I Have a Crush on Danny Phantom, which I wrote with my co-author Azura Tayabji, and it's called Self-Portrait Danny Phantom. Self-Portrait Danny Phantom. I enter the portal young, unfamiliar with love or what it looks like. In the algorithm, in gay porn, in the hole of my eye gaped wide, two boys slurp each other's shadows, strobe light lovers, animating the animal inside, the neon iris of a crocodile, its pupil slashed into an entry. I enter night every night, a nasty emerald. Green light crusts my eyes while I run the simulation again, again, again. Crooked limbs thrashed across the black slop oculus, swimming grim and glossy in vixen pixels. A string of code wraps itself around my throat, gawking at what two men can do. One, elbow deep in another digit fiction. What some call parasite, I call practice, pressing two bodies into one, slashing them apart, pythons, sprouting second heads, my face multiplying in the mirror. I am the exploded lover and the boy who breaks him open and the guilty black glass and the scared child looking back, asking what this means about me, what I could be. Look at me. I'm flickering. I'm Ghost Boy 1 and Ghost Boy 2. Now tell me who is who.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you so much, Ethan. It was just such a pleasure.
Do you have any closing remarks?
Um, get off your phone if you can. You know, pay attention to the world, aliven your senses. If you're young and you're a poet, keep doing it because it's beautiful and people think that we don't have things to say and we do. Many, many things. And I'm like super grateful to be a part of this series, Ethan.
All right. Thank you so much.